We begin here in Beijing, where DPRK leader Kim Jong Un reportedly has left this afternoon after talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He came to China by train, accompanied by his wife and senior officials. The visit comes as a second summit between him and the U.S. President Donald Trump looks more likely later this year. Meanwhile, officials in Beijing have stressed that constant dialogue is necessary to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
This is Kim Jong Un's fourth visit to China in less than a year. Analysts say that he may be trying to gauge a temperature check of China's support for lifting UN sanctions, and may also seek some advice on growing the DPRK's economy. With a possible second Kim-Trump summit just around the corner, China's key role on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is highly sought.
Both China and the DPRK believe it's necessary to strengthen strategic communication. The two sides agreed to jointly promote the healthy and stable development of China-DPRK relations, achieve long-term peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and boost the prosperity of the region.
At the landmark summit in Singapore last June, Kim and Trump pledged to work towards denuclearization, but the agreement lacked details, and talks since have made little headway. In his New Year's speech, Kim said he was willing to meet the U.S. president at any time.
Just got a great letter from Kim Jong Un.
And on Sunday, Trump said the U.S. and DPRK are discussing possible locations, but didn't mention a time window. Though Kim warned the DPRK may still be compelled to defend its sovereignty and interests if the U.S. persists sanctions, the timing of his visit to China and the fact he brings Kim Yong-chol, a key point man for the DPRK's diplomacy with the U.S., appear to be positive signs. Each of Kim's visits to China so far come ahead of important steps forward in the search for peace in the region and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The world is now waiting to see if that progress continues this year.
So, what does the DPRK leader's recent visit to China mean for peace on the Korean Peninsula? Let's turn to our two panelists. With us in Beijing studio, Rong Ying, the Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. In Medford, U.S., we invited Sun-Young Lee, a Kim Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Good to see you, Professor, as well. Let me ask you directly, Mr. Rong, what exactly do you think is the purpose of this visit? After days of visit, people are still debating about it.
Well, certainly I think it is a very important visit for the bilateral relationship between China and North Korea, DPRK, and also for the peninsula and the region as a whole. Remember, I think China and DPRK has a very strong tradition of exchange high-level visits, and since last year, I think the top leadership has met. This is the fourth time, and I think it's no surprise. But I think that what is important is that this year also marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relationship between the two countries. So I thought it was a very important visit. Certainly, I think opened up a new sort of significant in the context and the relations, both bilateral relations and also for the situation.
Well, a lot of anniversaries and a lot of adjectives being used in your answer, Mr. Rong. But Mr. Lee, Professor, to you, how much will this visit open more doors for peace and stability, particularly on the Korean Peninsula? And more importantly, at this point, the timing and the occasion of probably the second summit between U.S. and the DPRK.
I think the meeting will open many doors for the neighbors in the region, for Prime Minister Abe, for the South Korean President, President Moon, for President Putin, and certainly for President Trump to vigorously engage to court the North Korean dictator. Yes, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the PRC and the DPRK. It also marks the centennial 100th year anniversary of the Korean independence movement on March 1st, 1919, 100th anniversary of the May 4th movement. So that creates a momentum for Kim to seize the initiative in standing tightly with North Korea's traditional ally, China, and also with South Korea, and stand up against Japan and by extension the United States. So this was a good move by the North Korean leader. It puts more pressure on other powers in the region to follow suit and to enter into dialogue with Mr. Kim.
Certainly everybody has their strategies when certain political moves are being made from all sides. Having said that, though, Mr. Rong, China has been, over the past year or two, in a way, taking a back seat, quote unquote, when it is seeing that the two Koreas, the DPRK and the ROK, are getting ever closer to one another. And it is also seeing that the US and the DPRK are having at least the first summit ever recently. So China relatively is at the back seat. Whether China will come further to the front seat again, and will China be motivated enough to do that? Do China see that as the best option for the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula? Mr. Rong, what is China having in mind right now?
Well, China has always been very much supportive to the peace and the dialogue. And also, I think the reconciliation and the improvement of relationship, certainly between the two Koreans, the inter-Korean relationship, and also welcome and support the two most important parties directly concerned on the question of Peninsula, the United States and North Korea. So I think China has always, and it will continue to play a role in supporting and facilitating the dialogues between these parties.
When you say continue to, there seems to be some role changing, Mr. Rong, if I could be frank here. If you look at China during the six-party talks, China was making this leadership role, has to bring everybody together. It's not without much effort. Now, it seems that China does not necessarily have to come to the very front line in order to make things happen. The two Koreas are already patting things together, and US and the DPRK are exchanging letters on their own without necessarily a middle person like China. So, Mr. Rong, what exactly will be the role of China? Is China having a very clear mind and idea at this moment of exactly that role?
Well, I think China was the chair of six-party talks, and it has been playing a very important role. This kind of role, it has been recognized and welcomed by all the parties concerned. And looking at the situation now and in the future, as I said, that China will continue to do that. And that would be, of course, all depending on the parties concerned, directly concerned, and which is, as I said, the United States and North Korea. But China is also a very important part of the peninsula. Look at China is one of the signatories of the Armistice Treaty, and so in the future, so the process, particularly on the establishment of the peace regime and other and related regional mechanism, China will continue to play a very important role.
Professor Lee, of course, a lot of things are taking place at the same time. We see the negotiation between China and the United States on trade in Beijing earlier, and also the DPRK leaders' visit to China. And earlier, you also see some interactions between different players in Northeast Asia. So, Professor Lee, how do you see the role of China today, and has it been evolving as you see it?
China has always had great interest in the Korean Peninsula, always exercised great influence over the Korean Peninsula, will continue to exercise great influence vis-à-vis North Korea and South Korea. So China's role in any change in the status quo, whether in the form of a peace treaty between the US and North Korea, withdrawal of US troops from South Korea, if we come to that, China's role will be key. Of course, Kim Jong Un said in his New Year's address that he would seek China's hand. He did not mention China by name, but he referred to the signatories of the armistice, and of course China is the major belligerent, foreign belligerent, in bringing about, in inducing from the United States a peace agreement. So there is a convergence of national interests between North Korea and China in calling on the U.S. for a peace agreement, which of course would lead to the dismantlement of the UN command and perhaps even set the stage for the eventual withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea. Kim Jong Un also called on South Korea to freeze forever combined military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea.
Right.
China, over the past 2 years, as we know, has been calling for a temporary freeze, but Kim Jong Un went a step further. So I think the stars are lining in Kim Jong Un's favor for now, and he will continue to ride this momentum and come across as a reasonable peace-seeking statesman.
I see. But on the other hand, Mr. Rong, if you think about the DPRK, in the recent speech for the new year, the DPRK chairman was mainly talking about the economy. So China, of course, 40 years anniversary reform opening up just celebrated. And how much will there be? On the other hand, there's still sanctions against DPRK. So how will that balance be well done in a way to support the DPRK going further on opening up its economy, more on economic growth, but on the other hand, abide by the UN sanctions?
Well, I think China, as a responsible power and a member of the UN Security Council, will certainly, I think, would go along the UN security resolutions which China had supported. And in the meantime, China also made it very clear, publicly and openly, that as the provisions of relevant UN Security Councils, and there are rooms or there are possibilities that it has to be adapted to the changing circumstances, and particularly some of the relevant provisions that has been reversible in light of the changes. That would be help in the further the improvement of the relationship, preparing the ground for the final better management and the final settlement of the issues around the peninsula. And in the meantime, China would also continue to help and support and welcome certainly DPRK's decision to focusing actually transition towards economic development. As a matter of fact, that it is reported that, and as we have seen the past visits by Chairman Kim, he expressed a strong interest in China's experience in the economic development.
Right. Professor Lee, of course, we still need to mention the elephant in the room. Of course, the United States, President Trump is having a huge political stake in making sure that the DPRK, or rather Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, will be developing in a way that credits can be claimed for the near future. But the question, of course, is the timing. Now he's so busy with the war, many wonder, what about the denuclearization? In other words, will second summit taking place? What time? What will be necessarily be the calculation here, Professor Lee?
I think there's a great incentive for President Trump to hold a follow-up summit with Kim Jong Un. I think there's a great incentive for Kim Jong Un as well. So more likely than not, the second summit will take place in the foreseeable future, perhaps in the next few weeks. Will that lead to a fundamental change in terms of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? Not anytime soon, I don't think. With respect to sanctions, there is a big difference between lifting sanctions formally and enforcing sanctions or not enforcing sanctions, non-enforcement of sanctions. So while it will be difficult to formally lift sanctions before there is really visible concession from Kim in the dismantlement of existing nuclear facilities and bombs and so on, non-sanctions enforcement, not really vigorously enforcing sanctions, sanctions has already taken place with the dramatic mood change that we've seen over the past year. So I foresee that states in the region, including the United States, will no longer be so invested in enforcing sanctions against North Korea, which works in Mr. Kim's favor.
Before we go, from both of you, what do you see as the next step important for players in order to make things happen? And what would be the things they would like to see? Let's just say the DPRK and the United States, particularly right now, since that's what the focus are. Mr. Rong.
As the saying goes, it takes two to tango. I think from the North Korean's perspective, which I fully agree, is that the North Korean has made a lot, and it is up to the United States to make a corresponding move so that the momentum will maintain and the process will be going on.
Right, Professor Lee, that will only happen in 2 years before this election?
Well, you know, Kim Jong Un has a lot to gain by engaging the region in terms of economic concessions, especially from South Korea. The two Koreas agreed last year to resume inter-Korean economic projects like the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the Mount Kumgang Tourism Project, which were traditionally cash cows. $100 million or more per year in cash the North Korean regime received from South Korea. So I think Kim will continue to moderate his behavior and in the meantime be able to buy time and also money in the form of non-sanctions enforcement to do what he really seeks to do, which is, in my view, further enhance, develop his nuclear capabilities.
So what about the U.S.? You haven't answered the question.
Well, the U.S. will play along for now because managing the situation, crisis management is much better than crisis escalation, and President Trump is so invested personally in this rapprochement negotiation with North Korea, it will be exceedingly difficult for him to say, I made a mistake or this is not going well, and walk away from the very deal that he himself signed in Singapore. And I believe there's another deal looming.
Oh, wow, that's a big word. Thank you so much. A lot to come, it seems, from both of your analysis. Sun Young Lee and Rong Ying, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us.